This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the
Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the 72nd meeting of the Economy Committee. Some members will be attending this morning's meeting via Starleaf and our witnesses will be briefing us via Starleaf. The meeting will be broadcast live when open to the public and a recording will be made available on the committee's web pages on the Assembly website. The briefing on the Parental Bereavement Leave Bill will be hand-started as per protocol, and just to remind members to mute their tablet devices when they're not speaking. So moving on then to item number 1, which is apologies, and we have apologies from Stephen and Stuart may be in.
We may be able to join us, Chair, yeah.
Item number 2 then is the draft minutes, and there is a copy of the draft minutes from the meeting held on the 15th of September at page 5 of your pack. Are members content that those are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Content.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on then to item number 2, which is Chair's business, and just wanted to mention this morning the carbon dioxide shortage issues, obviously which have happened due to high energy costs in Britain, and in particular there have been issues highlighted about the impact on the meat industry and also some other industries. There was an announcement of a British government intervention with the companies in Britain yesterday, although I understand that is a 3-week intervention and not quite sure what happens after that. So if members were content that we would seek some feedback from business representatives about the issues, what the potential impact would be on businesses here, contingencies that are in place. Obviously there was stuff in the media yesterday in the Belfast Telegraph around Coca-Cola being somewhat insulated from the shortage due to the protocol providing the opportunity to obtain supplies from the EU. So it would be interesting to understand if other businesses are insulated in the same way or if they have opportunities to change supply chains. So if members were content that we seek that information.
Sure, that's right. Could we also just seek from the department in terms of what liaison they've had and if there's any impact here?
Yep, thank you. Okay, so moving on then to item number 4, which is the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill and the briefing from the Human Rights Commission. There's a clerk's memo at page 16 of your pack, and a submission from the Human Rights Commission to the committee's call for evidence is at page 18. So this is a briefing for the bill, and as such, as I already mentioned, it will be hand-sorted. So if I can, Tommy has the officials already in the spotlight. So if I could welcome to the meeting Alison Kilpatrick, who is the Chief Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission, and Sarah Sims, who is the Policy Officer. And members will likely be aware that Alison has recently taken up the role from the 1st of September, replacing Les Allenby. So I'm sure members would like to put on record our thanks to Les for his work and to wish him the best. So if I hand over to yourselves just to make an opening statement, and then we will open it up to members for questions, if that's okay.
Good morning everyone. Good morning, Chair. Thank you for inviting us to give evidence. What we thought might be most helpful was if I just gave you a very brief overview of what the Commission's powers and duties are in this respect. Sarah, who is the real brains behind this written submission, will then give you an overview of our submission and then move very quickly on to questions. You've seen, I hope, you have the written submission?
We do.
I understand?
Yep, we do.
Well, perhaps if I just very briefly then overview what the Commission is doing. You will all know that we were established under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It is a national human rights institution with A status accreditation, and that's at the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. The core function of the Commission is to review the adequacy and effectiveness of law and practice relating to protection of human rights in Northern Ireland under the powers in the Northern Ireland Act. Now, the way we do this is by advising Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Executive Committee of the NI Assembly of legislative and other measures which ought to be taken to protect human rights. We advise the NI Assembly whether proposed legislation is compatible with human rights standards, and we use all of the international standards, and you'll see in our submission we set out the difference between the hard and soft provisions. We promote understanding and awareness of the importance of human rights, and we bring support or intervene in legal cases concerning the protection of human rights. We also conduct investigations. We do have a new statutory responsibility and that's to ensure there's no diminution in rights, standards and equality of opportunity provided by the Belfast Good Friday Agreement as a result of withdrawal from the EU. So to fulfil that obligation, we work very closely with partners, the Equality Commission Northern Ireland and our counterpart in Ireland, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, and myself and the Equality Commission Chair, Chief Geraldine McGahey, recently met the Vice President who's dealing with issues on the protocol. So you'll see in the submission we've touched on Article 2 of the protocol and how that may be engaged, although we say at the minute we haven't identified any breach. If I could hand over then to Sarah, just to give you an overview of our submission.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks again for welcoming us to provide evidence to the committee. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of some points that we've raised within our submission. So firstly, just to say that we welcome the bill to provide a statutory requirement for bereavement leave. And in regards to just some general comments on the bill, we recognise that it does mirror the GB legislation. But just acknowledge that as it is a devolved matter, Northern Ireland has the opportunity to go beyond and provide a more progressive form of legislation that could provide better protections for people of Northern Ireland. We welcome the definition of a bereaved parent to include various types of parenting arrangements, and that this is open to interpretation for a wide inclusion of different types of parenting relationships. In regards to the notice period, we just want to flag that there is consideration of situations for sudden death, and also just to recognise that although it was originally drafted for 56 days after the incident, that the Minister made a commitment to this being changed to 56 weeks. Then just moving on to the entitlement of the parental bereavement pay, we do have some concerns in regards to this. So firstly, we are concerned that it will apply to employees who have only been in consecutive employment for 26 weeks, and that there would be exclusion for those on 0-hour contracts and agency staff. We just want to flag some international human rights concerns in regards to this. So firstly, just to state that the Committee for the Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights has flagged concerns in relation to the use of 0-hour contracts just more generally, and informal contracts. Just to state that they are usually overrepresented in this type of women are usually overrepresented in this type of employment, so there might be a disproportionate impact there. And the committee has recommended generally that to reduce these types of employment and ensure that social security rights of those workers are upheld. Furthermore, the UNCEDAW committee, so the Committee for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, has also raised concerns with social security rights in these types of employment affecting women. And just to flag, particularly the UNCEDAW committee has expressed disappointment that in the past with flexible working arrangements only being applicable to those after 26 weeks of employment. So we just wanted to raise those points generally, that they do have crossover with some provisions within this bill as currently drafted. And just also to flag generally that the department should conduct a human rights impact assessment, in particular in relation to Article 8 and Article 14 of the ECHR. So Article 8 in respect of a private and family life, and Article 14 in respect of discrimination. So that the department would need to set out, how the bill interacts with those rights and its decisions around those, and if they're proportionate and justified. A final point then is in regards to emissions, and we do recognise that miscarriage has been omitted from the bill, and we just want to flag that New Zealand has included this within their legislation recently, and just to flag it as an example of taking that progressive approach. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for the presentations. And I suppose just to pick up on the specific points in relation to the bill, and the individual members of the committee and their own contributions will have raised a number of the issues that Sarah has covered in her contribution, and obviously those are things that the committee is keen to explore with broader stakeholders as well. And I would agree with your opening statement around it being devolved law, and we do have an opportunity to go beyond what is currently in place in Britain and to be that bit more progressive if there is an opportunity to do that. We have raised concerns as a committee around the 26-week period for being in continuous employment, and that is something that we will be exploring in more detail with the department. And I suppose just in the two specific points around the 0 hours contracts and the approach to flexible working. Obviously, New Decade, New Approach had a commitment to banning 0 hour contracts, and there is private members legislation being progressed in respect of that, and also I understand in respect of flexible working, but those are issues that we can raise with the department in respect of the specific human rights issues that you have pointed to here. Certainly I think that as a committee we could support the human rights impact assessment, asking the department that, but that's obviously a matter for members to reflect on, and we can discuss that later. I don't have any specific questions, so I'm going to hand over to other members. Mike, you're first up.
Chair, thank you very much, and Alison and Sarah, thank you for the briefing. Couple of just questions to clarify from your recommendations. And first of all, in terms of miscarriage not being included, does that have any implications in terms of the bill's compatibility and compliance with CEDAW?
We haven't identified a breach, as it were, of the CEDAW principles. However, it's clearly there is I'm sorry, I'm losing.
No.
That was dramatic.
Oops.
You're on your own, Sarah.
Sorry, I don't know what's happened there.
There's been a coup.
Basically, just we didn't find anything that CEDAW has specifically said on this issue. That's not to say it might not be raised in the future, especially with New Zealand taking those steps. So CEDAW has just specifically recognised in relation to more general comments about the social security rights of women in work. So it hasn't been specifically raised by CEDAW specifically, but it's not to say that it won't be in the future, if that's any help.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we might conclude it's in the spirit of CEDAW, if not in the letter of the convention.
Yeah, of course, and it's also, I suppose, also taken into consideration Article 8 of the ECHR as well, and Article 14, that those need to be consideration as well. But yeah, it should be that within the human rights impact assessment, that consideration of CEDAW and the convention rights of CEDAW are also taken into consideration by the department.
Yeah, and that was my other question, Sarah, in terms of Articles 8 and 14, private life and discrimination. Does that open the door to the coalition of bereaved workers who want similar provisions for those who lose close relatives and partners?
So I am aware of, comments that have been made by, the organisations that directly work with those that are bereaved, and we would recommend that the committee obviously engage with them as those are stakeholders with those issues on the ground. We specifically focused on the bill as it was, currently drafted, in regards to Article 8 and Article 14, and with human rights law generally, there is flexibility, and the human rights impact assessment should look at, I suppose, the department's decisions around those rights and whether their decisions are justified and proportionate with Article 8 and Article 14. So basically, the human rights impact assessment should draw out those issues, but we do also recognise that those comments are being made by stakeholders working specifically on those issues, and we do recommend that the committee listen to those as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, we actually heard from the Coalition of Bereaved Workers last week, and I think I'm right in summarising a position as while they want similar legislation for close relatives and partners, they don't want to do anything to delay this particular bill by becoming law. So that's useful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike.
My apologies for disappearing. I'm sure you were in very good hands with Sarah.
Peter?
Thank you. Thank you, Alison and Sarah, for your presentation. I suppose just 2 points I want to pick up on from your submission. You obviously raised the issue of definition of a parent and talk about that being sort of inclusive and widely interpreted. And again, I don't think anybody would particularly disagree with you on that. And I think, I suppose, part of the issue in terms of interpretation is, I suppose, the more precisely it's defined, the more it runs the danger of not dealing with particular sets of family circumstances in relation to it. At the moment, obviously, the legislation does leave that sort of quite, I think, reasonably widely defined. It doesn't tie it down overly. I mean, are you looking at more tied down, or are you, broadly speaking, content with the wording that's there present, but just want to ensure that that is not interpreted in a narrow fashion?
Yes, I think we would encourage as broad an interpretation as possible. And if you look at the GB provisions, it really does encompass all sorts of parental and guardianship relationships. So it includes biological, adoptive, someone who's lived with the child for at least 4 weeks in a caring capacity. And we would say once you have defined, to determine it even more broadly if necessary, to reflect modern circumstances and modern situations in families.
I mean, I'm just wondering, possibly from a committee point of view, it may therefore be that it's not a question of amendment on the face of the bill, but there will be certain things, as well as what we say in terms of maybe a committee amendments. We'll also then have a report on the bill which will reflect, sometimes, and it maybe comes back to the point that Mike made earlier in terms of the, obviously we're yet to determine where we are, but in terms of looking towards future legislation as well. The other point I just wanted to check up, and again, I have a fair amount of sympathy for the logic of the situation. In terms of the scenario of effectively the time frame, and if we can put it maybe the terms whether these should be day one rights or whether it should be at a later stage. Obviously on the narrow grounds of the impact on the family, it seems to be fairly clear cut where the impact will be as severe irrespective of how long the person has worked for the firm. But I just wonder, from a human rights point of view, if there was, for instance, acceptance of this then appearing at day one, rather than, as currently drafted, the 26-week period in that regard. From a human rights point of view, is there any knock-on effect on other areas of legislation or indeed implications, if you like, for other sort of employment rights arising out of that?
We don't think so. We haven't identified any at this stage. Obviously, the right to leave is a day one right. It's the right to pay, which is dependent on 26 continuous working. Sarah has already covered, I think, very well our concerns in relation to that, and its disproportionate impact on women and some other workers. Because of the Article 2 commitment and of no diminution in rights under the protocol, and also the keeping pace provision in relation to a lot of the EU directives, we would have to keep that under review. And there's a team here working on the dedicated mechanism which is looking at that, and it will look at impacts on social security and other provisions. And if the EU amends or updates any of their provisions, then obviously these will have to keep pace. So I think the answer is, at the minute, no, we haven't identified any human rights considerations or impacts, but there may be, and we will keep an eye on that. And
just on the EU situation in relation to that, and appreciate, without getting maybe slightly different views in terms of the protocol and the appropriateness in terms of on the issue of EU law, in terms of what the regular position is in the EU or across EU countries, in terms of whether, in terms of parental bereavement pay, that it kicks in at a set point, or whether it is a day one throughout the EU, is there any sort of research being done just in relation to that?
No, not yet. Unhelpfully, not a great deal has been said in relation to parental leave and parental pay, parental bereavement pay. So we are putting together the principles to have a look at this legislation, but there isn't an established right to it as such. But if there is going to be a right, then it can't operate in a way as to discriminate. But there hasn't been any comparative research done. I don't know, Sarah, if you've had to look at other EU countries.
I think that, sorry, they take, various states take their own approach. I wouldn't be sure off the top of my head, the specific of certain countries, but basically it's just that, we're highlighting that there is specific EU law in regards to, employment more generally. So the Equal Treatment Directive, Social Security Directive, for example, and just that, we haven't necessarily identified a breach of Article 2 in the text of the bill as drafted. It's that there needs to be ongoing monitoring of changes in relevant EU law that might have an impact on that, to ensure that Northern Ireland keeps up with those changes and those rights.
No, I understand that would be fair summary then to say, in terms of the broader position of EU countries, that at least as regards bereavement pay and leave, it's maybe been a little bit of a sporadic approach, which has maybe been different from country to country, rather than a sort of a central approach, if I can put it that way, taken at this stage at EU level. Although I suppose what you're saying is you need to monitor to make that, if that changes, then it would have potential implications at present.
That's exactly right. We can't point to anything which is going to tell you whether or not it should be 26 weeks or not. There is no standard across the EU in relation to that. All the member states have taken their own approach. It's when if you're deciding, you can take a progressive approach and find that there shouldn't be any distinction in relation to the number of continuous weeks worked, or you can take the approach of 26 weeks but make sure it doesn't discriminate against others, and that's where our concern comes in, that it has a disproportionate impact on certain workers.
Okay, thank you. Points well made. Thank you, Chair. John?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, sir, for your presentation and answers thus far. Just in relation to one of your recommendations, Recommendation 6, the Commission recommends the Committee advises the Department to conduct a human rights impact assessment. What is the practical outcomes of that, or the practical workings of that? What is best practice in terms of carrying out a human rights assessment?
Once you have determined once you've decided what this bill is going to say and what the regulations are going to say, and considered how they're going to apply in practice, at that stage you screen it to make sure that there is no disproportionate impact, that it doesn't directly or indirectly discriminate against any group on the grounds of race, sex, age, etc. You would also have a look at the provisions in relation to the at that stage in relation to the 26 weeks. You could have a look at that stage and just scope out whether or not it does have a disproportionate impact.
So what's the difference between a human rights impact assessment and an equality impact assessment?
The human rights impact assessment will be broader. The equality impact assessment will be simply the equality provisions, whereas the human rights impact assessment will have all sorts of other considerations that will look particularly at the Article 8 implications, for example, on right to private life, family and home, and Article 14, the non-discrimination provision. Equality will just be in relation to equality between the protected groups, whereas the human rights impact assessment is much broader.
And I know the Equality Commission provides best practice to departments on how and when they should carry out the Equality Impact Assessment. So does the Commission provide best practice information to departments on how best to carry out a human rights impact assessment?
Yes, and we can provide that.
Could the committee have a copy of that as well, please? Thank you.
Yes.
That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I don't have anybody else coming in for questions, So just to say thanks very much for the briefing, and we will be already have Peter taken pass the recommendations on to the department.
Chair, the department has everything that we've been getting in terms of recommendations, queries and so on. For example, the raised paper we had with the scrutiny points, those have gone on to the department, as have the issues raised by the coalition on our own surveying. So everything encapsulated in the oral evidence we're getting is already in our survey, plus the written submissions that we were given. That's all been passed to the department for comment. So our briefing with the department's on the 6th. So we're anticipating we'll get answers to those questions to be able to go in the pack for that meeting. So that's the way we're operating that, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. Well, look, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this morning. It was very helpful.
If there's anything else we can do to assist, please do just ask.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we have our
Chair,
next
we are
witnesses.
running fast.
Okay.
So if you want to move to matters arising.
Yep, sure. Okay, so moving on to item number 6, matters arising. At page 97 of your pack, there is a copy of correspondence from the Communities Committee to the DFE Dallow expressing concern at the administration of the High Street Voucher Scheme, including around the holding of personal data centrally, the resourcing of the telephone service, the limited window of opportunity for phone applications, and the ability of vulnerable people to access the scheme. So if members are content to ensure that the committee is copied into the response.
Chair, it might be helpful to remind members those are all issues that this committee has already raised with the department.
Okay. Moving on then to 6.2, which is page 99 of your pack, there is an update from the Assembly's EU Affairs Manager on common frameworks and the indicative dates for these to come to committee. There are 6 listed at page 101 to be considered by the committee and are expected at the end of this month or early October. So that is just for members to note and be aware of at this point. Then at item 6.3 at page 102 of our packs, there is a copy of correspondence from the English language teaching sector to the Economy Minister asking that English language teaching schools are included within the Tourism Recovery Action Plan. The committee has had previous engagement with the sector around financial support, and the colleges call that they are adopted by TNI and Tourism Alliance so that they can receive the same benefits and support as the rest of the tourism and hospitality sectors. The committee has written to the Minister on the issue and received a response in July stating that although he sympathises with the sector, the issues facing it are a consequence of the global pandemic. Support packages have been put in place to fill gaps in support funding, but unfortunately it was not possible to legislate for every scenario. And obviously this correspondence is from the English...
It's, Chair, it's the sectoral group. In England and Wales, there's specific support in place for the sector. The way the sector operates, and the South as well, the way the sector operates is it's not just the English language teaching, it's the bringing people in from other countries, and it's the tourism they undertake, it's the events, it's the using the coaches, it's going to the places, it's visiting, the Giant's Causeway and all those other things. And the 3 language colleges here are all Invest NI clients and have previously worked very closely with Tourism NI and Tourism Ireland, and have done their road shows and events and so on, and there is support within those organisations for this sector. However, the response from the department has been that they are not willing to look at a specialist scheme for this. There are only 3 colleges, so it's not one of those kind of issues where you just don't know how many people are involved. There are 3 colleges here in Belfast, 2 in the northwest, and they have made very specific costings of what they might need.
Yes, and in fairness to them, they're not even asking for a specific support package. They want to be able to access the tourism recovery support funding. And there are a range of support schemes that Tourism NI are putting in place, and they want to be able to access them and currently wouldn't be able to do so.
So, Chair, I suppose at the end of the day, it's being reclassified by the department so that they accept that these are businesses that have a tourism locus, and that therefore they should be eligible for the large hotel and other tourism sector grants that are available.
Chair, can I come in here as
Yes,
well?
go ahead, Sinead.
I'm very familiar with these organisations. As you say, two of them are based in the Northwest, and they certainly have a tourism remit, a very strong tourism remit, and a very strong tourism footprint right across Northern Ireland. I mean, when these students come, they stay for a long time, and they use all our, hospitality and industry and actually do an awful lot of tours and encourage others and their families to come here and spend time here too. It's not really a big ask. It's actually recognition of the role that they play within tourism development within Northern Ireland, and it would be remiss of the economy or the Minister not to go back and look at this again and give it his due consideration, because I think there's been an oversight and it's been very, very badly handled and unfairly handled.
Yeah, and certainly my own view is that there's been a very rigid approach being adopted in terms of the classification of the business, and as you have outlined, Sinead, in respect of the impact that these businesses have in the local economy right across the north, and certainly there is a tourism focus to that. So if members were agreed that we go right back to the Minister and encourage him to meet with the businesses, because we have done that previously, but that hasn't been taken up yet, and I think that they make a very compelling case for themselves, and it would be useful if the Minister would find some time to talk to them, if members are content.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So moving on then to page 104, there is a response from the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education regarding the LCM on the Higher Education Cheating Services Prohibition Bill. The committee wrote to stakeholders asking for views on the bill, which seeks to make it a criminal offence to provide or advertise to students enrolled at English higher education providers cheating services for higher education assessments for financial gain. The QAA monitors and advises on standards in higher education and states that it has campaigned for legislation to criminalise SE Mills for a number of years. So that's to note at this stage, and all the responses from the various sectors will be considered in more detail once the LCM is brought forward. Then moving on to page 106, there's a response from NUS-USI in respect of the LCM, and it is also supporting the extension of the legislation to the north.
Sure. Is there any indication as to when the LCM on this is coming forward?
So the Minister has indicated through a memorandum that he wants to bring forward legislation. He wants to be included, in the GB bill. He had talked about a date of the 24th of September was what the devolved administrations were being asked to come back by to indicate whether they were going to be participating in this bill. He had gone out to the sector. Members will recall 3 of the universities and university colleges had said they were supportive. They didn't think it was a particular problem here. 2 said they really didn't have any information to comment. That was St Mary's, I think, and OU. Or it might have been one of theirs, I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, there was no one objecting. We've gone out now, the QAA have said they're supportive, and the students have said they're supportive. The Minister was talking to the Executive to seek approval to move on a motion to be included in the GB legislation. And he was also talking to Scottish and Welsh counterparts. We still don't know, or we haven't been told, what their position is. So where we are at the minute is we've gathered our own evidence that corresponds with what the Minister has said, and are preparing a committee report on the legislative consent motion should it come, because we're given a very short turnaround on that. We would automatically go to preparing a report no matter whether it comes forward or not. That's the way we have to work because of the time scale. So that's where we're at. The Minister hasn't told us any further information on whether the Executive has given agreement to proceed with this, and that's kind of what we're waiting for now. Once they've agreed, a motion will be laid. The committee can then agree a report to respond to that. But we essentially are waiting for that to happen. But assuming the deadline of the 24th of September that was given by the Minister previously, which is Friday, we would expect that to be coming through very soon. And out of today's proceedings, we go back again to the department to ask for any updated timescale. We've been doing that as we've got our own responses on the issue. So that's kind of where we are. Chair, we're ready. Should we need to proceed if there's a motion for the committee then to decide where it wants to sit on that?
See, reading in between the lines of some of the responses, there is support legislation, but whether that relates to or transfers to supporting an LCM is another matter. I support legislation, but I'm not necessarily sure I support an LCM, because it's very complicated in terms of some of the balancing between making the mills illegal and not giving a student a criminal record. And it's not as simple as some suggest it is.
Chair, that's one of the issues that have been highlighted by some of the responses we have, but also, to be fair, in the Minister's initial letter. One of the reasons why this has occurred now is that the department is minded to legislate, but in terms of being able to do that within this mandate, that's not going to be possible. So when this bill came, Lord Storey's bill came to the Lords, it was seen as an opportunity to get that legislation in place. The Minister's concern, and as I said, we still don't know the position of Scotland or Wales, his concern was that Scotland, Wales and England would proceed with this, and therefore we would be the only region that wasn't included in that, and then that would make our students more of a target. The responses we've been getting suggest that it isn't a significant problem here, and that while, as you say, there's sympathy for the legislation, no one, to be honest, apart from the QAA and the students themselves, have come back to say that they are really desperately keen for the legislation to come, that they are, it's something they've been waiting for or wanting. I don't want to say they're ambivalent, but they have not suggested any great need for haste.
Yeah, just on John's point, Ellen Fearon is saying that the criminalisation of students is not at risk from this bill, but from other legislation. I don't know what that is, the other legislation.
Potentially, it's where this ultimately goes. This, I suppose, could be seen as foundation legislation. And it does state very specifically that it would criminalise those who are offering services that aren't what they're claiming to be. That's very hard to pin down and define. And where that kind of goes is it's the suggestion that the students are unwitting. However, in this scenario, if students solicit these services, they are going to be committing a criminal act. So it's almost as though the emphasis is on the organisations and the criminality is placed on them if there's some level of duping the students.
Yeah.
That seems unlikely.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that on the reading of what I've seen as a lay person, but one would imagine that a student entering into this knows they're entering into something that is not appropriate, that would not meet with the approval of their lecturers or tutors and whatever else.
I think it was set out in the Minister's letter as to what legislation that it would fall under.
So what Ellen is talking about other legislation, I was taking that to mean existing.
So there will be, it'll impact on other legislation. I can't off the top of my head.
It's one of the criminal justice bills, soliciting a criminal offence or something.
Yeah. So that in itself is something to think about, because I suppose the issue is you're not just necessarily buying into this, or that this isn't a discrete thing that is done without any impact. There is that impact in terms of other legislation being relevant and having to be amended and so on. So there's a lot to think about there.
Yeah.
And I think that's potentially one of the reasons why there hasn't been a response from the executive, is because departments will see that there are potential further ramifications of this.
Yeah. I think there's a huge difference between being a student under pressure, making a very bad decision, and being an essay mill, deliberately making money by exploiting.
Yeah, although, I mean, I take on board that there is a bit of distinction there. Having said that, if a student is deliberately going to an essay mill, they are cheating.
Yes,
So
yeah,
let's
yeah.
You know, let's not entirely. This is not somebody acting entirely innocently in that regard. I mean, there is a lot to think about. I don't disagree with that, but it's not as if there's somebody just naively entering into this.
But there's a range of motivations for the students, whereas there's a single motivation for the essay mills. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
I think that's why the focus needs to be principally on the essay mills. But again, I don't have entirely. I think it's not without consequence. I think for the student either.
Chair, I think that's where the delay has arisen, and that's why we haven't had a rapid Scottish or Welsh response. We're continuing to monitor this, and again, as part of our readout of today, we go back to the department to see if there's been any further update, where we are with the executive, where we are with Scotland and Wales.
I think I suspect possibly with the executive, it may be more that this is at a level, I wouldn't say below their radar, but not probably in their top handful of issues in that regard. I think the other devolved institutions will also be significant in relation to this, because I suppose one other thing we want to slightly avoid is a situation where our institutions, where there's some, for the 99% of students who actually behave entirely appropriately, get their degrees, get their courses normally, that we don't want a situation where Northern Ireland stands out compared with everywhere else, and then there's a little bit of hint of suspicion which may impact on somebody, for instance, they're getting a job or whatever, of, you know, is there a shadow of doubt over their degree? Now, I think if there's a decision taken across the board that this should be something that should really be left to devolved institutions, different approaches, different speeds on it, I think that puts it in a slightly different context.
Yeah. Mike, what it specifically says is a student who solicits the services of an essay mill may be guilty of an offence of encouraging crime contrary to section 44 and 45 of the Serious Crime Act. If the policy aim is that students should not be criminalised in these circumstances, then a defence to that effect will need to be incorporated into the bill, and obviously we have no ability to ensure that happens.
So, there's, in terms of the responses we've got, there's nobody's done a cut and paste job and copied it in by way of responses?
No. I think there are enough issues there, and I think it may well be a case of seeing how Scotland and Wales proceed. As I say, although that date of the 24th is there, there's no indication that that's likely to be met. There's too many things that still need to happen before that. We'll continue to seek those responses from the executive from Scotland and Wales as and when they're available. But I think that Friday deadline is not likely to be met. But we are, as I say, preparing a report just in case.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on then to 6.6, at page 3 of our table papers is a response from the Minister in respect of the Community Renewal Fund. The Minister states that a lack of meaningful engagement is a concern and reiterates that DFE will lose direct spending power as a result of the decision to implement these funds at national level. This is why it is so important that there is genuine partnership and collaboration between national and devolved government in order to avoid duplication or gaps. DFE continues to press to ensure that the Shared Prosperity Fund will cover at least some gaps that will be created. Where budgetary gaps crystallise, DFE will make the appropriate bids to DOF, who lead in the replacement of EU funding. The response from the Minister does not align with the responses that we received from the two British ministers that we had recently had correspondence from. So if members were content that we would share the Minister's response with those ministers and pick those issues up directly.
Chair, members are content, we'll go ahead and do that. They both sent reassurances that the engagement is there. The Minister has indicated that it's not. Members will recall previous Minister Dodds, when she was briefing the committee in person, on one occasion highlighted her deep concern about this, that the engagement is meant to be there and it hasn't happened, and these funds fit into so many areas here. They need to be aligned with policy. And that has not been doable, I suppose, because that engagement hasn't been there. So we can highlight the Minister's response We seek permission from the department to share that because we don't automatically do that. But I'm sure the department will understand and appreciate the committee's concerns.
Okay, so 6.7 then, page 4 of table papers, there is a response from the department to the committee's request for an update on the Presbyterian Mutual Society. The department states that whilst the PMS joint supervisors have indicated that the shortfall could be 18.5 million, they have also noted potential upside should contingencies provided for it not be required. The FE states that given the current advice, it appears prudent to continue to account for the expected credit loss at 18.5 million. So that was just in response to a query from the most recent update that we had. So it's just for members to note at this point. And then moving on to 6.8 at page 5 of table papers, there's a response from Ulster University in respect of the LCM on the Higher Education's cheating services prohibition bill. So again, UU is outlining support for the bill, believes it's a positive step forward. But as Peter has indicated, we will collate all the responses and bring them back once the LCM is brought forward. So I think we actually have our witnesses now.
We do, Chair. Catherine and Richard are now there, so if we return to that item.
Okay, so if we go back to item number 5 then, the briefing from University of Exeter academics on energy governance here. There is a clerk's memo at page 31 of your pack and the report by the academics on energy governance at page 40 of our pack. This briefing follows on from the academics' publication of their report and an informal meeting with the committee earlier this year. So Tommy already has the witnesses in the spotlight. So could I welcome to the meeting Dr. Richard Lowes, who is the former research fellow at the University of Exeter Energy Policy Group, and Professor Catherine Mitchell, who's Professor of Energy Policy at the University of Exeter. And if I hand over to yourselves, and thanks very much for joining us this morning, if you maybe make a wee opening statement, and then we can open it up to members for questions.
Sorry, Chair, just Professor Mitchell, we can only see the top of your head. That's you, that's you.
Okay, can you hear me, everyone?
We can, yes.
Hi, good morning, and now I can see myself, so that's a bit strange. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting us to speak to you. Early last year, Catherine and I, or I should say the Energy Policy Group, were contacted by the Department for the Economy to think about a piece of work around the future of energy governance in Northern Ireland. And this was part of the development of the energy strategy process. And I think the initial contact from us really led on from some of the engagement that we've been doing in Northern Ireland around Catherine's iGov work and around some of the work that the University of Ulster were doing regarding energy transitions and the future of energy in Northern Ireland. After a very short and simple contracting process, we started the work, which took place, actually, the research itself took place in May and June last year. And so at that point in time, obviously the pandemic was very much in flow by then. It was roughly a 2-month project. I was the lead researcher and author, and Catherine provided a lot of review and advice on the project. And we really built on a lot of the work that Catherine had been doing around the iGov project, which was looking at GB-wide governance, and tried to take some of those principles across to Northern Ireland. The research used 2 key elements. So there was a literature review looking at existing government policy documents for Northern Ireland, as well as using things like websites to build a picture of governance in Northern Ireland. And that led to a map, which you can see in the report, of the current structure of energy governance, which is clearly quite complex, particularly for buildings. And following the literature review, and also sort of at the same time, because it was quite a short project, I interviewed a number of civil servants and regulators across the Northern Ireland Executive and various associated bodies to test whether the map was accurate, but more importantly, to test whether the interviewees thought that there was room for improvement in the governance structure for energy in Northern Ireland. And that then led to a new map, a proposed energy governance structure, which was really, I guess, our our best understanding, based on the interviews and the literature review of where the issues were, and if Northern Ireland wanted to reach its goals for carbon reduction, how you would need to reorganise governance. And I think the fundamental conclusion really is that we strongly believe in the report there is a need for thorough governance reform, particularly for certain sectors, but doing it in buildings is, I think, the big one, because there's just so much work needed on buildings and so little time. But also linking that all together, there are clearly much wider changes. And so actually what we proposed was bringing much of energy and climate change policy into one department, and also having a new body, a sort of independent energy authority, which could potentially report to quite senior levels in government, but also advise other parts of the department. So we didn't really propose anything drastic around renationalising energy systems or anything like that. But we do see a need for significant internal reform in terms of energy governance. I'll pass on to Catherine now in case there's anything additional you'd like to add. I think you might be on mute, Catherine.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I agree.
Well, look, thanks for the overview. Obviously, we had some conversation with you around a number of issues in informal meeting, and we thought it would be useful to have the discussion with the broader committee in advance of the energy strategy briefing, which is the next week actually. So this is very timely for us. The energy strategy consultation has completed, and we're hopefully being briefed next week on the kind of the outcome of the consultation and then the department's way forward. So I suppose there's a number of, you've raised a number of issues in relation to your work, and then I suppose there are some very topical issues at the minute, in particular in relation to the soaring gas prices, which are really hitting both consumers and businesses. And obviously there's been a lot in the news in Britain this week in respect of that, but it is, there have been announcements here around gas and electricity prices rising, and that really to do with global demand in gas. So it's one of the things that I guess we wanted to discuss with you would be the role of gas in the transition, and maybe to get some views from you in respect of that. And obviously you have outlined your views around the governance issues in particular, and the creation of a new oversight body, and those are some things that have been raised with the committee as well, in terms of our call for evidence that we did in respect of the new energy strategy, and a number of areas that you have outlined that you've advised that the department should take cognizance of in terms of the energy strategy, that actually very much chime with the feedback that we got in terms of our own micro inquiry. So that has been really useful for us as well. But maybe if you could just address the gas question first of all, and then we can have a wee bit more of a discussion.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll go first, and Catherine can add thoughts afterwards. So yeah, gas prices at a wholesale level have increased significantly, and that's already feeding through to customer bills in the UK. That the price cap obviously has been increased already, and looks likely to be increased again. I think when we think about the Northern Ireland energy system, you have to look at where the big demands for gas are, and they're primarily in power generation and in heating homes. And so while the proportion of homes heated by gas in Northern Ireland is much lower in the UK, I think it's around 25% in Northern Ireland. Obviously those homes are likely to see prices increase. Homes using electricity will see the impact of power prices increasing, because obviously the power is being generated from electricity. And also I think we have seen an upturn in the cost of oil, which is in part linked to the wholesale gas price. And so oil prices are likely to link to that too. From an energy governance perspective, I think the biggest impact, or the biggest area in need of reform probably is around housing and buildings. because fundamentally that's where most of the energy is used for people. It'll be either transport or heating. Similarly to GB, energy efficiency of the housing stock in Northern Ireland isn't that great, so that should be an absolute policy priority, because that will reduce carbon emissions and reduce costs over the longer term as well. More strategically, I think the shift towards electrification is likely to be very important for heating in Northern Ireland, and that's been picked out by various independent reports, such as the Commission on Climate Change's analysis and other modelling which has been done by NI universities. Northern Ireland, as we pointed out in the report, is fairly blessed, and Ireland as a whole, the island of Ireland, with a world-leading wind resource. And so while of course the wind doesn't blow every second of the year, it does match quite well with heat electrification and heat pumps, and potentially could lead to a valuable hydrogen storage economy too. And so if I were to sort of pick one area of governance reform that I would want to tackle immediately, it would be the energy efficiency and heat demand of buildings. And I think really, the report was obviously before these price rises, but we did sort of go quite heavy on buildings in the conclusions. And I think those conclusions are probably even more validated by these price rises.
Yeah, no, that's really. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Catherine. If you were coming in as well.
Yeah, no. So I think I sort of just think on a slightly different level. Prior to iGov, I had a project from 2008 2012 called Energy Security in a Multipolar World, and it was very clear that if you want to have an energy secure energy policy, that you basically have one which is related to renewable energy and energy efficiency. And we did all the kind of the background work on all of that, and would follow through with that. I mean, I can remember being on a Newsnight What If program, which was about what if Russia cuts off the gas in the mid-90s. And we were arguing, if you want to have an energy secure strategy, you should make sure that you have an energy efficient strategy. And the opportunity now with climate change to sort out your climate change issues, to sort out fuel poverty issues, and to have energy security is to make sure that that policy that you have is a transition away from fossil fuels as soon as possible. And it's exactly the same place. It's been around for 30 years, and the time has really, this is just yet again another of these crises which have been happening with regularity for a very long time. And so the time is to do something in a kind of an energy policy sense. Now, in the short term, it's difficult because we have a market run for within energy, and that is leading to suppliers putting forward tariffs which are uneconomic. And if there are regulators that are not making sure that the tariffs that are put forward are not economic, then this sort of thing will happen. And then that means that people who are buying from sort of what you might think of as economic tariffs are going to end up having to pay for these uneconomic ones. So this is also something around the regulator who really ought to, instead of just thinking, oh God, the market's going to sort itself out, because this is the market sorting itself out, and making sure that the tariffs put forward really are economic and not the kind of tariffs which just work in the good times, and expect in a so-called market situation that the state then picks up the problems for that.
No, that's very useful, and I guess you have highlighted the issues there in respect of the short term and the longer term, and obviously there are short term issues, and particularly here in the north where we have high levels of fuel poverty and lower disposable income. So we have particular challenges when we have the high energy costs that are being experienced at the minute, which I guess emphasises the need to rapidly invest in renewable sources and diverse mix of renewable sources to, you know, enable us to end the reliance on fossil fuels and those huge fluctuations that are being seen in respect to prices. And I think it is a really good argument as to why we would like to do that as quickly as possible. And the point around the housing and the buildings, I think it does highlight in particular the very complex nature of governance here, and like I can think of at least 4 departments off the top of my head that have a direct role in the regulation of buildings, but obviously investing in energy efficiency is going to be really pay off in terms of overall energy costs. So that's something that we are keen to see incorporated strongly into the energy strategy as well. In terms of the immediate steps that can be taken in respect of governance, could you maybe just speak to that will make a difference in the most immediate way?
Is that in terms of costs for consumers and fuel poverty issues?
Yes, and also in terms of meeting targets in relation to decarbonisation, because the two things, I guess, go hand in hand.
They do, but it's difficult. We're going into winter now, and the length of time needed to get an energy efficiency policy up and running, a decent one will take probably a year to properly scale up to the sort of speed that you need it to reach net zero by 2050. So I guess the development of that policy has to start really immediately. It should have started already. And so just sort of speeding up the publication of the strategy and the key levers that will be used to deliver a wide retrofit policy will be important. In the shorter term, it's very difficult to say because I don't think we quite know exactly what bills will look like. I guess, and this is really from a personal perspective, you'd want the most vulnerable to have protection to ensure that they can stay warm, and whether that is some sort of additional cash payment into whatever's already there, I don't know, but we don't quite know what the price rises will be and when they'll come in, so it's just really ensuring that the most vulnerable are able to keep warm, and it's as simple as that. And I don't think in the short term there's much more we can say.
What I think would actually be kind of I'd quite like to sort of see government say is because as Richard says, we don't, at the moment it's unclear how many people are not going to be able to afford their bills. We're unclear how many suppliers are going to cease trading. The suppliers that are left are unlikely to want the customers that are going to have to be looked after, because on the whole, those are these sort of uneconomic tariffs. And so why would a supplier really want to take those over? But it's absolutely going to be necessary that those people are looked after. But I would, and the whole kind of pro-market side of me thinks, well, this is really very annoying that we're in a market situation rather than a regulated situation, and we're still having to effectively have state support. That just incredibly annoys me. But having said that, if there could be, at the same time as there being support, if Northern Ireland could say, look, we recognise that this is the situation and this is not going to going to happen going forward. We're going to take steps to make sure that the kind of tariffs and resources that are offered by suppliers really are economic, then I think that would be incredibly helpful. And as far as possible, some kind of warning saying that if suppliers put forward uneconomic longer-term tariffs, as they are doing, that the state isn't going to pick up the price for that, then I think that would also be useful. I mean, in reality, you can't not do that, which is why the market is a mirage. But it would be really helpful that both the utility and the government really do say that this is not acceptable and something that you don't want to have happen going forward.
Yeah, and I guess in the north we are in a slightly different situation in respect of gas regulation, because that is regulated, and the utility regulator has a direct role in terms of the tariff setting, but the electricity, on the other hand, only one of the companies, only Power NI, is actually regulated by the utility regulator. So they're, but in some respects, they benchmark, I guess, the other electricity suppliers, but there is less control over those. But I think you make a very important point around that system of regulation being in place to give that protection to consumers. I'm going to bring in some other members for questions. Sinead, you're in first.
Thank you very much, Catherine and Richard, for your overview. I suppose there's a big light been shone at the minute over energy security and our over-reliance on particularly on gas. And looking at our own energy strategy and policy coming forward, I think that, we in Northern Ireland have an over-reliance on, or been over-influenced rather, by the gas industry itself. And gas as a transitional fuel is not just making any sense to me at all, because we are still pumping money into it and we're still developing it. It seems to be we're going through a process or a step that we don't need to go through in order to get to the place where we actually really want to be, and net zero and more efficient energy as well. Richard, you brought up the issue of energy efficiency, and I think that we skirt around this really, and we're not taking it as seriously as we can. And we were talking about fuel poverty and what we can do right now in order to support people that are finding it very difficult to pay their bills. Energy efficiency surely has to be where we prioritise now as we evolve into other sources of energy. And we really don't, like within the Department for Communities, we have an affordable warmth scheme, but really that is really supporting maybe people to change away from oil burners to gas burners. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Can you maybe give us your thoughts around energy efficiency programs and where our prioritisation should be around that?
Sure, and I might come back to the previous point as well, if that's okay, Sinead, around the extension of the gas network, which still continues in Northern Ireland. And I think rather than you've described it as something that doesn't necessarily need to happen, I actually think it's something you haven't got time for. Because looking at the length of time to get to net zero, which is 29 years, you can't build and connect to a gas grid and then decommission it in that time. The timescales just don't work together. Whatever gas you're using in the future, it's almost very likely to be imported. So I think there's a point there that investment in fossil fuel infrastructure just has to stop, and it has to stop immediately, because there's just no time to do anything else. On the point around energy efficiency, and there are so many policy levers you can use to drive energy efficiency. For households, it's quite difficult because they don't know where to go necessarily to get help. So there's an issue there around communication and advice. And I would suggest that you look towards Scotland, who have a funded energy efficiency helpline through the Energy Saving Trust, which the Scottish Government pays for. And any house can just phone up the helpline and say, I've got this house, I'd like some help to do it. I guess this links to the second part of my point, which is around the actual financial support for households to act. The first port of call for households in Scotland is the Energy Saving Trust. The Energy Saving Trust also administers grants on behalf of the Scottish Government for households. And often financial support is needed if you're undertaking a more significant energy efficiency measure. So, for example, loft insulation is something most people could do themselves. So people I get won't want to, and it's only a few £100s normally. So you might not need financial support for that. But if you want to do something a bit bigger, and the options then you've got are things like cavity wall insulation, solid wall insulation, which is a big issue in Northern Ireland. And also maybe underfloor insulation and new doors and windows. They are much bigger capital investments. So you're going up into the sort of thousands of pounds territory. but they do pay for themselves eventually. So there is a sort of national financial benefit to doing these things, as well as the carbon reduction and, of course, the comfort and the fuel poverty benefits. But the capital issue is a big one. And so where the government needs to be is that it's offering at least financial support to get people to do it for no upfront cost. I think in an ideal world that would be grants for every household that wants it, and Scotland is doing that, so it's not unprecedented. That could happen. The next best option might be some sort of financial package around a loan, but I think that's got issues depending on the type of tenure and depending on the income of the household. But so fundamentally, I think what I'm saying is the combination of support via some sort of telephone or online service plus the access to grants are two things that should be absolute priorities for energy efficiency.
And building regulations need to change and adapt to ensure that, you know, there's a certain standard that must be met in any new build or even existing buildings that have to be brought up to standard as well. Also, I mean, again,
can I just interrupt as well, just to carry on with that actually, you know, you really need to have, so what Richard has described is a sort of you know, it's very kind of individualized still for people. And if you want to go up one more level, you just make it much more coordinated, and you kind of have rollout. You can have rollouts, so you can do the same sort of things, but you can also allow local authorities and so forth to. I mean, certainly local authorities have to be involved anyway, but they can stop. They can, as opposed to individual homes, can bid in for money to sort of have more street by street type rollouts, for example. And so, you know, you've kind of got different levels, and there are good examples of that, whether in the Netherlands or Germany as well, that you could think about.
Sorry, my second question that I wanted to ask as well was just about the diversity of supply of energy. We've had great targets, actually. We met great targets for our renewables, but basically the majority of them all were onshore wind, and there is a bit of security of supply in relation to that as well. So, you know, looking for a diverse range of renewables is really important for our stability and our security of provision as well. And, you know, we have a unique position here on this island, and that's offshore wind as well. Have you given consideration in your report regarding recommendations for offshore?
I think, if I'm correct, we didn't make any specific recommendations around offshore wind. I think that's fundamentally an economic question, although there may be governance elements there as well. I can check now. As far as I remember, there was nothing specific about offshore. No, there wasn't. I can confirm that. I think absolutely you're right, and it does depend on the geography and the economics, but I think Catherine wants to come in.
Well, I just want to say, you know, from the governance point of view, that you're completely right about diversity of sources. And that you know, in some ways, having a transformed energy system is about technologies, but a very, very large part of it is also about how you do the sort of system operation. And if you have a good system operation, then and you have energy efficiency, and you have, you know, demand side and so forth, you can run the system very, very efficiently, and it is in itself an energy efficient tool, if you see what I mean. You need less of everything in order to provide the same service. So it's important that the two things go together, and we do talk about that because the governance of good system operation has to be set up to design. It has to be designed to do that.
Okay, thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. Mike?
Chair, thank you. Richard and Catherine, thank you for your engagement and a fascinating report. I think your two governance maps make clear that whatever we do, it is a deeply cross-cutting issue that we're dealing with. I'd like to ask you about your 4 overarching recommendations. I mean, number 4, you say, suggests that duties placed on all the executive departments with regard to climate and energy transition, which suggests to me that this is something you could apply to the current structures, and the executive office would become the lead department as the coordinator of executive business. But recommendation 1 recommends a new department for climate and energy transition, so inevitably it would be the lead department. So I'm wondering how you see the relationship between a proposed new department and the executive office. Secondly, you talk about a new independent energy body. I'm wondering how that would interact with the utility regulator and also with the Consumer Council, because now we would have 3 independent bodies at play. And your third recommendation with regard to Northern Ireland specific carbon budgets, could you expand on what they are, please?
Sure, no problem. So having to do a quick bit of revision. On the 4th point around a duty on each government having a responsibility for climate and energy transition as part of its duties, I just don't see why you wouldn't do that. The government is committed to a net zero target in the same way that, and I appreciate this may be different in Northern Ireland, in the same way that the UK government there's a requirement in impact assessment production to consider impacts on equality and fairness. I don't see why a duty in the production of impact assessments, that there shouldn't be a duty, to consider carbon as part of those assessments. I think that just makes sense. For example, if you're building a new road or a new airport or creating a new agricultural policy, why it doesn't just make sense to consider what the climate impact or what the carbon impacts of that are as part of that process.
Yeah, Richard, sorry to interrupt, Richard. I'm not questioning the wisdom of having targets. I'm talking about who coordinates in terms of government departments.
Well, I think the point we're making is that I think we refer to a quadruple lock actually in the report. We think all of these different elements together will have some impact, but only actually if you want to reach the goals by 2050, you need to do all of them together, and it provides multiple sort of backstops and arrangements to do that. I think a department level one makes perfect sense. In terms of the role of the executive, I think on the actual proposed map, we'd have the independent body reporting to the executive in a similar way that the Committee on Climate Change in the UK reports to Parliament. But it would be more direct than that because many of those suggestions and the expertise from the independent body could feed up, and then the executive has got the power to do that. And fundamentally, I think this is about a power change because as well as stuff happening at a departmental level, there's a coordination thing that has to happen at the same time. And without something at the executive level, we weren't sure how you could make some of the complex interactions that are necessary, how you could make them work. Buildings, again, is a really good example of this because the structure is just so complicated. And even if you were to pull many of the issues into one department, there still wouldn't be one person saying, have you met our carbon goal for buildings or heat? And on the other point, I think, which is the final point around the specific adoption of carbon budgets, the point here is that other nations in the UK, so Scotland and Wales have a specific carbon reduction goal by 2050. Scotland is in advance of the UK-wide goal, and Northern Ireland doesn't have such a specific target. And I think that just came across as a bit of a gap.
But you're referencing budgets rather than targets in your report?
Oh, sorry, yes. So, well, the target would lead to budgets.
Okay. And the idea of a new independent body interacting with the likes of the Consumer Council and the regulator?
Yeah, so I think the issue which was raised previously actually around the influence of industrial interest was part of the reason for this, but many successful energy governance structures, and Denmark's a really good example here, and Catherine can talk about that at length, have an independent expert body around energy. And this is separate to the Commission on Climate Change in the UK, because their focus is climate change policy. But a successful independent energy body, something like an Energy Council, would have at their fingertips the best available information about technology costs, about the performance of policies, about consumer uptake, and about wider costs as well. And it would just be, again, another addition, another sort of part of the chain to allow independence and best available information. I think, we didn't go into enough detail really to say exactly how these organisations should work together, but there absolutely would be a role for them to work with the regulator, because they can share information around costs, so it doesn't need to be that every single person is new. And also with the Consumer Council, similarly around costs, but also around consumer engagement for things like energy efficiency campaigns and the rollout of heat electrification and potentially the removal of oil. So we just felt, and based on the interviews, and this was actually a very popular thing to come out of the interviews, one of the most popular ideas was that some independent body was needed, really so that I guess the executive and Northern Ireland as a whole has got some fully objective and fully independent thinking.
Can I just come in on that? I mean, it's slightly, you're talking about these different relationships, and iGov did a similar report for GB, and so we've been kind of discussing these kind of same kind of relationships. And in the end, it comes down to direction and democracy, really. So you have the executive office, and you've got the kind of combined ministry that is not siloed so much. So in the first step allows, I think, better policy. But you really, if the executive office sort of takes up the coordination side of things, then that is essentially very kind of political, really. And it's much easier if you have a separate body that oversees everything and can kind of come to some conclusion and give advice to the executive office. And then the executive office can decide what it wants to do as the correct democratic body to take those kind of decisions. And then having taken those kind of decisions, can then direct to make something happen. And it's the need for direction and the need for coordination, which is the thing that is necessary to actually reach net zero on time. I mean, if you think about how long we've been trying to sort of do all of this stuff without direction, but via the market and so forth, and that is the lack of direction, the lack of ability to push something through is one of the key issues to not meeting all of these targets. So that's why I agree, you have got your executive, you've got your ministry, and then you've got this new body. I agree that it looks like it's, and I am not somebody who just sort of supports new bodies willy-nilly, but I in this situation, that new body allows this kind of independence plus direction plus democracy to all happen together in ways that you can't really do if you don't have it.
That's useful, Richard and Catherine, thank you. I would just, as a concluding remark from me, say, at one point I worked as a commissioner, independent commissioner in another area, and officials were keen to press upon me the fact that while ministers were obliged to listen to my advice, they most certainly were not obliged to act upon it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. And I guess just in relation to that energy advisory body, is the SEAI in the south a direct kind of comparison as to what perhaps you would be advising in respect of that?
Yes, I would think so. It's a body that exists just across the border, and I think there are functions that could be replicated. The SCAI is probably a bit more involved in actual policy delivery than maybe the new body might be, but then perhaps it could. So yes, I'd say that would be a good comparison.
And just on that particular point, like we have very integrated energy across the island. Is there, and you reflect this in your report, is there a need for, I guess, further oversight on an all-island basis in terms of energy governance?
I don't think there necessarily is. I think as long as the electricity market is functioning well, that's the key element. I think if there were to be an SEA NI, I think they would naturally want to work with each other. That would make perfect sense.
Okay. John?
Thank you, Richard and Catherine. I'd have to declare an interest in the sense that I have a private members bill currently going through the Assembly, and the objective of that is to increase the availability and encourage more small-scale green energy production, i.e. allowing family homes, farms, communities to produce energy and then sell it back to the main grid. In terms of security of energy production, have you examples of that elsewhere in terms of a more integrated democratisation of energy production anywhere else on the continent? And what is your views in the terms of a greater reliance on small-scale production than simply relying on a large-scale production?
I mean, I can answer that if you want. I mean, yeah, there's lots of examples in other countries. I mean, Germany and Denmark are probably the best known, but there are, multiple, whether it be Spain or Italy or wherever. Everything is moving really in a kind of a smaller way. So if you think about buildings, we're kind of moving into heat pumps, we're coming energy efficiency, we're kind of having electric vehicles. Things are moving from this very kind of big hit, top-down, one-way kind of system to being at a much smaller and a more decentralized system. And when you have more renewables, then you kind of have variability. And in fact, this kind of smaller system really helps that in many ways. So in terms of security, providing you have got the right sort of institutions in place, and you've kind of got the right regulation, and you've got the right system operation, it allows you far more flexibility, which means that you can be far more energy efficient, which means that you should have a much cheaper system, and that overall it is smarter. So you're going completely in the right way. The problem with the old kind of big kit stuff, along with the sort of flexibility needs of variable renewables, they're just big lumps. And so, what you're doing and supporting is absolutely the right economic and system running thing to do.
Okay, can I just ask sorry. Okay, sorry. Richard, you had mentioned the Scottish Government's Energy Saving Trust. Is part of that trust's budget or grants, does that facilitate small green energy production, or is that in terms of remedial action, in terms of better insulation, etc.?
I'd have to check the details. It provides grants, loans, and allows access in some cases to the renewable heat incentive. I'm not sure whether those grants can currently be used for PV. I think the loans can. It would be very simple to find out by just going on their website. I think the beauty of the Energy Saving Trust scheme is that it provides a combination of measures. The Energy Saving Trust in Scotland scheme, I should point out, because the UK government doesn't fund any energy efficiency advice through the Energy Saving Trust. But if you are a household that, say, has a need for solid wall insulation and a heat pump, I think it will provide a grant of up to £10,000 and a loan on top. And then you can combine that with the renewable heat incentive. So it does support microgeneration and energy efficiency as a package. I'm not exactly sure on the different levels.
And finally, just one last question. One of the arguments against small-scale energy production, small-scale green energy production, is that there is additional cost associated with it, connecting it to the grid, and that those who cannot produce green energy or benefit from it end up paying for that in their electricity bill. So one example has been used to me: somebody living in a high-rise block who can't produce green energy ends up paying for an extra cost on their electricity bill because of the cost of connection of someone who's more fortunate, lives in the country, can put up a small-scale green energy production plant, and they pay for that production and the connection to the grid. Is there any validity to that argument?
Well, if you I can make anything kind of stack up in any way you want me to make it, depending on what variables I put in there, sort of thing. But in general, you can make that argument if you have a very static, as in this is a snapshot now, individual analysis. And but I think that if you look at the analysis within the transition, which is a dynamic thing, and you're changing stuff, then you need to kind of get from A to B, and the whole cost of running the energy system, as we were talking about earlier on, with the kind of the gas prices rocketing now, the whole point of trying to do this transition is to get to somewhere where the actual cost of running the system is far, far lower in total, so that the overall cost to all customers comes down. So that's a kind of combination of energy efficiency, so people need far less energy, so their bills are much lower, but also the cost of the energy system, the infrastructure of the energy system is run in a much more efficient way. So the actual cost of running that energy system is also lower. And therefore, the kind of doing this is a required step to get to that society level economic lower kind of cost. And therefore, those people who can argue in this static individual way are really, it's a micro slither. It's not, as far as I'm concerned, a completely honest reflection of what the economics of that is. Now, that's not to say, of course, that there isn't a cost of going from A to B. And in so doing, the realities of the cost of doing that and the effect of that on various vulnerable homeowners needs to be addressed and needs to be confronted. But if you kind of go for the energy efficiency in vulnerable households in the first instance, then their bills will come down and you'll find that they're better off and they also have a better comfort level in terms of the housing that they're living in.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Keith?
Okay, thank you for your presentation and obviously your report, Richard and Catherine. My question, I think Sinead touched on it earlier, regarding building regulations at the start. Richard, you referred to loss of energy through homes, etc. Do you think is our building regulations adequate, what they currently are? And if they're not, who has got it right?
I think it's worth clarifying first whether you're referring to new building regulations or existing for retrofit.
New building regulations, Domestic.
So no. I think they're very similar to England regulations at the moment. Sorry, my dog's just walking around behind me.
I'm doing something here, but keep going.
So they are very similar to England ones. They're currently inadequate. They're inadequate in terms of air tightness and in terms of fabric efficiency, so the level of insulation, and they still support fossil fuel heating, so you can still put an oil or gas boiler in. What this effectively means is that these houses will need to be retrofitted in the next 30 years if we're going to meet the net zero target. So the simple answer, no. Who's got it right? Germany have a very good new home target. If you were to aim for something which exists that you can take off the shelf, I think I'd recommend Passive House Plus, which is effectively ultra low energy demand buildings combined with renewable generation, so most likely PV, which at least covers the building's annual energy use. And I think if you talk to counterparts in the Republic of Ireland, they are already considering making that a requirement for new builds.
And what do you think, Richard, that would be in cost? Can you give me an approximate cost to get it right in percentage-wise above what we're doing today? So in a new build, have you any idea over and above percentage-wise that would be to build the house or dwelling?
I'd have to go back. The Committee on Climate Change has looked at these numbers, and so there was an increase in costs, but it was exceeded by the reduction in running costs over the lifetime of the building. So it's an additional capital cost, but overall it's a reduction in total costs.
Just one final question. If you look at page 28 of your report, you have a little breakdown here under figure 8 of, I think, a 68-70% of houses on fuel oil, gas, etc., etc. And that's ranging from 2006 to 2016. Obviously, there's a small reduction in fuel oil and then obviously an increase in gas. What do you define as non-central heating?
I expect that will be energy used in things like open fires.
Okay.
Or it could be. No, electric's already covered in the previous one, so I expect that will be open fires.
Well, would solid fuel not be umbrella? Anyway, the point is, there's not a dramatic change in. I know that's 2016 figures. There's not a dramatic change in those period of those 10 years. What needs to happen to make that change, and where should our graphs be? So you're talking about heat pumps. Are you referring to heat pumps as in underground heat pumps? Is that what you refer to? You know, from picking heat from the underground source, or were you referring to heat pumps?
Well, both I think would be similar. Whether you were to go for an air source or a ground source heat pump will depend on the heat demand of the property. I'm in a average size terrace, and I've got an air source because that made more financial sense than a ground source here. I think for oil, fundamentally, it's got to go by 2050. You know, it's never going to be a zero carbon fuel. Even with the most optimistic assumptions about what you could do from bio oil, which is also far from zero carbon. So I think what much of the energy system analysis points to is that all of the oil would be replaced by some form of electric heating, most likely heat pumps. And in the urban areas which are currently provided by gas, which obviously is currently being invested in at the moment, there's likely to be a role for district heating as well. Although I don't think those discussions are particularly well developed in Northern Ireland, they're actually not very well developed in England, a bit better in Scotland, and there's a theme emerging here around Scotland's progressive nature around heat. But fundamentally, that there aren't that many low carbon heating technologies other than heat pumps and district heat networks.
So if we were to go back to this conversation in 10 years, and obviously we're 5 years from the little maroon box there of 2016, what other bar should we have on that chart, and what should it say, and what percentage do you think it'll be in 10 years?
I think you should probably simply have a low carbon heat bar on that graph, which you know that could be a new column. I wouldn't like to guess what that would be. I would hope it was somewhere near 20 or 30%, because that we're in 10 years' time. We'll be a third of the way towards what's left towards net zero, and currently renewable heat's extremely low. So you'd want to be a third of the way there in a third of the time.
But ultimately, what's happening?
Can I just come in here on that? So my main piece of work at the moment is that I am a co-lead of the IPCC Working Group 3 Mitigation Chapter. Working Group 3 report, and I am the co-lead of the National and Subnational Policy and Institutions chapter. Working Group 1 has just come out. We have to be at net zero by 2050, and what that means effectively for energy is that we have to decarbonise electricity by 2030, we have to decarbonise heat by 2040, and we have to decarbonise transport by 2050. So it's simply not possible to kind of wait around, and you need to kind of get going on what in general is kind of the easiest sort of things. And so I would say, now I'm not saying that you'll get there, because you're not going to get there without governance and without the kind of the money. But really what you should be doing is, you know, taking the graph, going down to 2050, and then seeing what amount of technologies have to be done to kind of reach each of those decarbonised bars.
Okay, thank you, Richard and Catherine. Appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. It has been really, really useful for us. Catherine, I liked your points there. So we need to decarbonise electricity by 2030, heat by 2040 and transport by 2050. I think that's a pretty good takeaway for us. Currently we have a target, I think, of at least 70% of electricity from renewables by 2030, and I think there is a willingness to look at more ambitious target in respect of that as well. So I think that's something. We do have the FE energy officials coming to committee next week. So as I said, this has been a really timely briefing from yourselves and given us a lot of points that we'll be able to put to them directly. So look, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us. Really appreciate it.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Which is effectively, I think, to make this happen, the government is required to sort of make it easy for all the various actors that have to do stuff, whether it be local authorities or companies or individual homeowners. It's the kind of making it easy sort of element that coordinates that is really going to be necessary to kind of make that extra step.
No, I think that's a really important point. Making it easy and making it affordable as well for people, I think, is going to be some of our key challenges.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So,
Chair, what we'll do for next week is the memo we've done for today draws together the key outworkings of the academics report plus our own micro-inquiry plus the department's consultation. So what we'll do is, now that members have had a chance to discuss issues with the academics, we'll pick those out again and we'll add that in so that you can see with easy reference the sort of suggestions they're making, particularly around that energy authority. I've sent members a link to the Sustainable Energy Authority for Ireland, which, if you look at the top bar on its homepage, actually gives you an insight into what they're doing around a lot of those issues that the academics raised around the sorts of grants you can apply for direct. So it's there in terms of retrofitting homes, applying for buildings to be insulated and so on and so forth. It just gives you an idea of what a body like that can look like and what it might do. So just thought that would be helpful.
Chair, can I come in there just for a second as well? I thought it was quite interesting, the issue around building regulations, and I think the Department of Finance has a major role to play in this, and I was wondering, would it be opportune now to have maybe the department to come in and give us a briefing just where they are in relation to developing regulations that will make houses and homes and our future more efficient.
Chair, we have the energy officials in next week to give feedback on what they've got from their consultation on their energy policy or energy strategy policy. So it'll allow the committee to also find out more on how they're talking across departments in terms of the level of coordination that Catherine and Richard were talking about, the idea that every department has a role. So there's a particularly big role, as has been outlined, for the likes of DFE, DOF, DFC and DERA. But it does fit across other departments as well, and there is that natural function of the executive committee sitting within the executive office and having to discuss these kinds of issues. And potentially the concept, I suppose, of all policy being looked at through that energy prism. So it'll be useful. Officials already indicated that there won't be legislation flowing from the energy strategy this mandate, but that it would be likely then next year and the year after. It's trying to pin down what exactly they see, so hopefully there'll be a much clearer picture coming out of that next week. It would allow the committee to take on board what it's heard already, but also see if the department is going in that direction or if it's not really looking at things beyond its own remit. I suppose that's probably the key thing, is making sure it's strategising across all executive departments rather than just something from an energy division within one department. It'll be very interesting to hear how that works.
Well, let's hope it's the matter.
Massively building that up.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on then to item number 7, which is the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. There's a copy of the admissibility criteria for amendments to the bill at page 120. The clerk has written to the department for a response on the issues highlighted by Raise and in responses to the committee's consultation. The response is expected to be with us in advance of the October 6th briefing from officials, and that will also be the last oral evidence session on the bill. The clerk has looked at the responses received to the committee's consultation and established that there are a number from individual men as well as men as part of organisations with a male perspective being highlighted. Peter, you might want to speak to that.
So we had a number, quite an impressive number of individual responses coming back, and there was quite a good proportion of those. Now, we're not talking 50%, but there was probably a good 15 to 20% were from individual men, where they've given a very specifically, I suppose, male-focused perspective on this. And then when we looked more into the responses from some of the coalitions like Bliss and so on, they did actually highlight the specific response that men have had, and that, if that makes sense, that's incorporated into what they've said. So it has given me pretty good reassurance that male perspective is captured, because as Mr. O'Dowd said, men don't talk a lot about issues, but it has been well captured in this. We also have a number of those individual men in our reference group if we want to then draw anything further out.
That's good, thank you.
Okay, so moving on then to item number 8 is the SR on the High Street Coronavirus Financial Assistance Scheme regulations, which has not yet been received. It was expected to be laid on Monday past to provide a legal basis for the opening of the scheme to applications next Monday. And as of last night, the latest information is the SR is with the Executive Office for consideration.
It might just be worth reminding members that the primary legislation that this comes from sits under the Executive Office, so they've given permission for DFE to legislate in this way to bring forward the SR. So obviously, because it's their legislation, they have to give approval. So once that has happened, the SR can be laid. What it does mean is that we are unlikely to have it at a committee meeting before the portal goes live. Theoretically still on Monday, that date has been put out there. As soon as we get it, we will forward it to members. But the likelihood is it will be operational before we have another committee meeting to discuss that. It's not ideal, but it's the type of SR it is. It's not just the department's responsibility, and the double checking, if you like, by more than one department has slowed things down tremendously. So once we have it, we will fire it on to members.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So moving on then to item number 9 is SR 2021-253 C10, the Employment Act Northern Ireland 2016, Commencement number 4, Order Northern Ireland 2021. The SR is at page 123 of your packs, and last week the committee considered the SL1 and wrote to the department for further information in relation to each aspect of the Employment Act which is brought into operation, and we have not yet received a response. So can we wait on that response?
Yeah, the fun thing about this one is because it doesn't have a procedure, there is no real normal route for us to go. As members know, for affirmative or confirmatory, that has to go through a process in the chamber. For negative resolution, if the committee opposes, it can bring a power of annulment. With this, there is no such procedure, because the elements that are being brought forward by statutory rules were agreed within the primary legislation. So this is effectively commencement when systems are in place. So when we get it, the committee can scrutinise it.
Can we ask ICTU for
Yes.
their view on the items that are being brought into operation?
We hopefully will have that fairly soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Item number 10 is an SI, the EU Research and Development Programmes Revocation EU Exit Regulations 2021, and it has not yet been received, so the item will be rescheduled.
Yeah, Chair, we put that one in because we'd expected it, and as members know, the formation of a pack is a number of days in advance of actually sending it out in the committee meetings, so it was there. We were hoping it would come and it didn't, so the item remained in the pack, and we'll roll it forward until we get it.
So moving on then to item number 10, which is correspondence. 11.1 at page 130 of your pack, there is a copy of correspondence from Lord J on harmonised rules in AI and amending certain union legislative acts. So that is for members to note. 11.2 was a duplicate of a previous item due to a technical issue, so you can disregard that one. 11.3 then is at page 134 of your packs and is a copy of the DFE monthly economic update for September. So that's for members to note. At page 135 of your pack then is a copy of the second report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules for 2021-22. So that is for members to note. 11.5 then at page 11 of table papers is correspondence from the Finance Committee regarding its call for evidence on the defamation bill. If members are agreed, we'll forward this on to the department for any views on the provisions or impact of the bill from a DFE perspective.
Agreed.
Thank you. And then 11.6 at page 15 of table papers is a copy of a response from DFE to the Communities Committee regarding measures to alleviate the rise in energy costs. DFE states that one of the key objectives of the new strategy will be to ensure all households and businesses have access to essential and affordable energy to enable a decent standard of living, health and competitiveness. DFE maintains a dialogue with the Department for Communities on energy price rises to make them aware of the potential consequences of these rises, especially on the most vulnerable, so that they might consider any mitigations that would fall under their remit. And the department will brief the committee on its energy strategy next week. And Peter, we had previously asked for the utility regulator in respect of the energy costs. The Consumers Council might be useful to have alongside them.
Yeah, I think that would be worth scheduling a joint briefing on that. We will. I think we'll know a lot more once we've heard how the department is interpreting the consultation. At the moment, you know, there's a lot of questions there around what legislation might look like, what sort of structures they want to put in place, and obviously if they're talking structures, then that will have an impact on the utility regulator and the Consumer Council, as was brought up in the discussion with the academics. So that will be an opportune time then to get them in to see, one, how they see themselves fitting into that, and two, whether they've had that engagement, if that's something that they are comfortable with, if they are aware of it, or if things haven't got that far.
Okay, so moving on then, 11.7 is at page 16 of table tapers, correspondence from the DALO regarding the making the Insolvency Practitioners Recognised Professional Bodies Revocation of Recognition Order NI 2021. The department has been notified by the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants that it ceased to licence any of its members to act as insolvency practitioners at the end of 2019, and the Law Society has advised that it will do so on the 5th of January 2022. Accordingly, the department has agreed to make an order to remove the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants and the Law Society from the list of bodies in Schedule in the schedule of the 1991 order. The order does not have to be laid in the Assembly. 3 solicitors are currently authorised to act as insolvency practitioners by the Law Society, and the 4 remaining recognised professional bodies have indicated that they will be willing to authorise them should they wish to continue in insolvency practice. No local practitioners are licensed by the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. Therefore, this body's revocation will have no impact on the profession here. So that is just for members to
Yes,
note.
Chair.
Okay, and then 11.8, page 17 of table papers is a copy of a report by Renewable NI on a pathway to zero carbon electricity system in Northern Ireland. The committee will be briefed by officials next week, so that's something that members would maybe like to have a look at. And then item number 12 then, at page 98 of table papers, is the copy of the new forward work programme, which we haven't managed to change yet.
No, I think it's still completely accurate for today.
So that's for members to note. And just to advise, the committee is also seeking an oral briefing from the department in early December on the outcome of the comprehensive spending review, when we will hopefully be hearing about multi-year budgets. Item number 13 then is any other business.
Sinead.
And Sinead has indicated that she wants to come in.
Yes, Chair, and I'm sure other members have experienced the same level of complaints, perhaps from parents, that children haven't been able to secure accommodation from Queen's, or had secured accommodation from Queen's and then subsequently lost it. I mean, I think, if I would say anything, it was probably a communications disaster on behalf of Queen's, at the very least. So I just wanted to raise it, and I think that it would be important maybe for someone from Queen's to come in and brief the committee just exactly what went wrong. Obviously, there was more demand than supply, and it's my understanding that 330 or so students actually lost out on accommodation that they thought or felt that they had secured. And obviously, it has had a big impact, and I know that those probably living closer to Belfast are going to have more of an impact, because there's no guarantee at all that they will secure accommodation for this term. And it is a bit of a crisis, and student accommodation needs to be affordable to students, and we need to look at this in the long term as well, and what's going to happen next year, and is there plans in place. So these are lots of questions that I think Queen should possibly attend the committee and give us a briefing and an update on where they are with it.
Chair,
sorry.
Well, I'm happy to endorse that proposal in terms of Queen's coming in. And I think it does need a certain long-term planning as well. Now, there's a perfect storm has come together, and Queen's explained this when we were there a number of weeks ago, that more students are prepared to stay away from home as a result of the COVID lockdown than were previously the case, and I accept that. But I also think there has to be some long-term planning in relation to student accommodation in the Belfast area. You also have to look at transport links as well moving forward. But I think lessons from this year need to be learned quickly, so we can adopt them for next year. But I think even next year you may see pressures, because what is needed is more accommodation in that area.
Chair, we'll go ahead and organise officials to come in and talk to the committee.
Okay, thank you. So moving on then, item number 14 is the date, time and place of the next meeting. And the next meeting is Wednesday the 29th of September, and it will start at 9:30. And just to remind members, that was a ministerial briefing and energy officials.
Yes, Chair, and we're in the Senate chamber. We're still pinning down the best way to make it work in terms of whether the minister comes in or not. And I was just explaining to members earlier on, because of the run of officials we have, you have that issue of sort of sanitising in between. So it might work best if we have some officials via Starleaf, and potentially those who are going to come in for the ministerial briefing. The Dallow and I will discuss how that'll work out logistically, but we will be in the Senate chamber. So it just means we've got that bit of flexibility in terms of people and space and so on. We've also got our full time. That was one of the other reasons for moving there.
And members, we are going to go into a very brief closed session, but just to remind members that the committee has a informal meeting scheduled on Teams tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. with the Institute of Global Food Security at Queen's. Okay, so we're going to go in just a closed session.
Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.